Hello and welcome to Byju's IAS. Let's get started and look into the first article. The first article is speaking about farm bills. We have discussed in the last couple of days what these farm bills are, what are its concerns, what have been the assurances given by the government of India, but we have not discussed in detail about the constitutional angle. So what would be our discussion today? Our discussion would be to understand if the central government has the right to come up with such a legislation. We have something called as the seventh schedule of the Indian Constitution. What is the seventh schedule? It divides into three different compartments. You have something called as the union list, you have something called as the state list, and third is what is called as the concurrent list. So all those items which are present in the union list, the center would be able to make laws. Let's say for example defense, let's say for example communication. It is the responsibility of the central government to make laws when it comes to this particular domain of union list. Then we have something called as the state list. All those items that are present in the state list, it is only the state governments which would be able to make laws. There are other exceptions to this particular law, but then we also have what is called as the concurrent list, where both the central government and the state government would be able to make laws. One such sector is the educational sector. Now what is that we have to look at? When you look at state list as given under the 7th schedule, you have one of the entry items called as entry 14, which clearly says that the state list mentions the item relating to agriculture. So who can make laws? It is the state government. Agriculture, including agricultural education and research, protection against pests and prevention of plant disease, is clearly under the domain of the state government. So only the state governments would be able to make laws under normal circumstances, except for an exceptions as well. Then we have something called as the union list. So the union list has once again clearly said that agriculture will fall under the domain of the state governments. Let us look into what are these items. We have 82, which clearly says taxes on income other than agricultural income. So the government would be able to impose the taxes on everything except the agricultural income. Again, agriculture is out of the domain of the central government. 86 speaks about taxes on the capital value of the assets exclusive of the agricultural land of individuals and companies. Agriculture once again out of the domain of the central government. We have the state duty in respect of property other than agricultural land. Agricultural land again out of the scope of union list. Duties in respect of succession to property other than agricultural land. All these items clearly define that agriculture, when it is given in that list, it is beyond the scope of union list. Now what we have to ponder is how is that the central government, in spite of all these clearly laid rules in the 7th schedule, making sure that it is passing laws with respect to agriculture. That is where we have to look into what is called as the concurrent list. What is this concurrent list? Both the central government and the state government would be able to make laws. So we have one of the important items, and that is item 33, which speaks about trade and commerce in and the production, supply and distribution of the products of any industry, where the control of such industry by the union is declared by the parliament by law to be expedient in the public interest, and importing goods of same kind or other products. This is one of the types. Now look at it carefully. We have something called as foodstuffs, including edible oil seeds and oils, cattle fodder, including oil cakes and other concentrates, raw cotton, whether gin or not gin, and cottonseed, and finally it also speaks about raw jute. All this are an aspects of agriculture. So the central government using these terms can actually make laws when it comes to agriculture. Then we also have entry 34 in the concurrent list, which clearly speaks about price control. What is this price control with respect to agriculture can again be taken up by the central government. In fact, we have the Essential Commodities Act, which was passed by the central government back in the 1950s using the same entry 33, which is present in the concurrent list. So because they are able to use the concurrent list, they are able to make some of the laws into the domain of state governments when it comes to price control as well as other issues that are present under entry 33. Now the question is, why is that the state governments are opposing the move of the central government? That is because of two reasons. One, it is violating the federal structure. The other is the revenue losses. So what is this violation of federal structure? As we have clearly discussed, we have entry 14, which is clearly about state taking the responsibility to make laws with respect to agriculture. When central government is fiddling with that particular law, it means it is violating the federal structure and it is a direct attack by the central government on the state resources as well as state law making powers. That is one point. Then we also have the revenue losses for the state government. How losses? Let me give you an example. We have the APMC mandis. You also have the commission agents. Now, who is controlling this APMC mandis? It is the state government. So these commission agents are also paying some fees as well, and the state governments are also controlling it as well. So they are generating some revenue. And now, since this is a direct attack on the APMC. Why? Because the farmers are given an alternative path where they would be able to sell their produce. It means the state will lose out on some revenue as well. Why? Because the commission agents will not be able to get enough fees, and now they would not be able to pay the state governments, and as a result, what we see is the revenue losses. So it is an attack on the federal structure and there are losses for the state governments as well. Now the question is, if let's say the central government has made a law with respect to the concurrent jurisdiction, can the state make a law? Yes, they can make a law, but if it is in contradiction to the central law under the concurrent list, the mandate clearly says it is the central government's law which will hold on to it. Even if the state makes a law, it has to be given consent or the clearance by the center. So why does this happen? That is because when the central government comes up with a law, it is applicable for the entire union, which means for the entire country. So indiscriminately, if they are changing laws, it means there will be inconsistencies when it comes to different regions. That is why there is precedence, that is the central government law which will overtake the state government's law. Even if the state government passes it, this will require the permission or this will also require the clearance of the center. In fact, when you go back to the Sarkaria Commission, when this particular commission was appointed, you had two states which were already opposing this entry 33 as well as entry 34 of the concurrent list. Why? Because these state governments, that is the state government of Tamil Nadu as well as the state government of West Bengal, clearly felt that the center, in the name of controlling the price, in the name of agriculture and food, can enter into the domain of the state list and can interfere with the objectives of the state list as well. In fact, they had already opposed it and now this has become a reality, says some of the critics. Now what is the way forward? The states can come together. They can oppose this particular move initiated by the central government by challenging it in the court of law. They can directly go to the Supreme Court, where the Supreme Court has the exclusive jurisdiction under Article 131 of the Indian Constitution. So now all the political parties who are opposing it and the state governments who are opposing it can head to the Supreme Court of India, and the Supreme Court of India will now deliver the judgment, is what this article all about. With respect to the concerns, what the government has done, what the government has spoken, we have discussed in our last 1 week, so kindly look into it. Now let's look into the next article. This article here is speaking about United National Liberation Front of West of Southeast Asia. First, we'll understand what is this organization all about. There are a couple of insurgent groups that are operating in northeast part of India. One such insurgent group where multiple forces came together and formed one single group is what is called as United National Liberation Front of West of Southeast Asia. So what are these four different groups? Back in the 2015, you have United Liberation Front of Assam, National Democratic Front of Bodoland. Both these parties are active in Assam. Then you have Kamtapur Liberation Front of Bengal and Myanmar based Kaplang faction of the Nationalist Socialist Council of Nagaland. All these parties came together and they started one single organization called as this United National Liberation Front. What was their original agenda? When you look at why did they come together, that was to make sure that there is an independent country for the India's northeast, and at the same time there are some contiguous Naga inhabited region in Myanmar. So gelling both these parts and making and creating an independent northeast was their agenda. And they also wanted to operate government in exile as well. Why? Because they realized that in case they have a government in exile, they would also be able to get the international support as well. In this particular backdrop, all these entities came together and created this International Liberation Front. Now the question is, why did these entities come together? They were all operating in their regions. They were totally independent as well. They had their different objectives. They had their different agendas. But they realized that their strength would not be able to take on the government of India. That is why all these organizations come together. They realize that all their strategies can come into picture and the agenda can be achieved only when they come together, because their strength will get enhanced as well. In case they are operating independently, they will have minuscule number of people who can go against the government of India. But if they are operating together, their strength will increase, their strategies will come together, and they have the only aim, that is the independence of India's northeast. And at the same time, they also felt that the Indian army is one of the most powerful. They also felt that this will require better organization. So in case they have to take upon the Indian army and fight against India, they require coordination, and that is the another reason all these four entities came together to fight for the cause of independence of India's northeast. They were planning this from 2015, and finally in the year 2015 there was a combined squad of guerrillas who ambushed and killed as many as 18 army personnel in Manipur. This happens to be one of the worst attacks on the Indian army. And after this ambush took place, the Indian army also had to show its strength as well. This is when, in close cooperation with the Myanmar troops, they enter into the hinterland of where these guerrillas were operating, and in fact neutralize all those participants in this particular ambush. So what we have to understand from this particular backdrop is that when this particular incident of army neutralizing starts place, that is when the strength of this organization also starts reducing as well. There were other challenges to this particular organization. What are these challenges? As we initially discussed, there are four groups which are coming together, which means each have their own objective, each wanted to have their own strategies as well. So when you have large number of people who come together in the form of a coalition, there would also be ego clashes as well, since they were not able to hammer out a common minimum program which is acceptable for all the different groups under one single organization. They started actually moving away as well. One is because of the Indian army attack, two is because they did not have a common uniform strategy, and three is also because India's northeast region and some parts which are contiguous with India's northeast region, those operating in Myanmar, the regions are totally different as well. The socio-economic and political conditions that was present in India's northeast is totally different from Naga region, that which is being operated in Myanmar as well. So because the political setups in northeast region and in Myanmar region were totally different, again synchronization with respect to all these entities started missing as well. Why are we discussing all this? That is because the Assam government has informed the UAPA tribunal that major extremist outfits of northeast had contacted the Chinese authorities for assistance in their fight against India. When they contacted the Chinese officials declined as well, and that is when Pakistan enters into the fray. So this organization did enter into some consensus with Pakistan. They were also supplied with guns and other equipments as well. Pakistan's ISI did ask this organization to damage all the Indian government's properties, railways, bridges, police and security forces. In fact, oil refineries and other garment properties as well. However, this particular plan could not be executed. Why? Because there was dilution within this particular organization, and Indian army was sharp enough to neutralize these as well. And gradually, what we actually witness is that the insurgency related incidents have been declining in the northeast of India. That is because of the actions of the armed forces, and at the same time, these armed groups, insurgent groups, are looking for autonomy within the confines of the constitution. They are no more looking at the independence of India's northeast, but now they are seeking for the autonomy, is what this article all about. Now let's look into the next article. This article here is speaking about patient safety. Whenever we are ill or we have some trouble, we head to the hospitals. Hospitals are the temples because they give life a new life. But there are issues as well. Let's say for example, there might be number of people who head to the hospital, but they may also have side effects, as there have been couple of issues surrounding this particular incident. So what are the issues? Let's say for example, the range of operations done on the wrong patients. The operations was to be conducted on one person, but it has happened on someone else. Then there are injections which are being administered in an unsafe manner. So when these are the issues, who suffers the most? It is the patient. So according to statistics, 1 in 10 patient experience or is subject to harm in the healthcare settings. So what are these harm? This includes unsafe surgeries, medication safety not taken into picture, blood safety that is supposed to be followed, transfusion supposed to be followed is not taken into picture, and we also have the faulty medical devices which all pictures in, and this becomes an unsafe manner for the safety of the patient. In this particular backdrop, we have to look at other important statistics with respect to India. Studies in India have also shown more than two-thirds of injection are given in an unsafe manner, and in two-thirds of the cases, the injections or the medicines are not even required in the primary healthcare sector, but they are even given as well. So all these incidents mean that it is the patients who are the major sufferers. To overcome all these issues that we just discussed, the World Health Organization has come up with what is called as the World Patient Safety Day, which is celebrated every year on September 17th. So what is this patient safety? Basically, you have the medical personnel, you also have the doctors, you also have the nurses. So they have to take certain measures, they have to follow certain protocols to make sure that these side effects do not harm the safety of the patient. That is what is called as patient safety. So reduction of unnecessary harm which is associated with the healthcare is what is called as patient safety. For the year 2020, the theme of it is health worker safety, a priority for patient safety, with a call of action to speak up for the health worker safety. So this is speaking about health worker safety, that is the doctors as well as nurses. What are some of the reasons as to why patient safety is always haunted? There are miscalculations and there are issues that are persisting when it comes to patient safety. There are a couple of issues in this particular issue. One is what is called as the unsafe healthcare practice. So what is this unsafe healthcare practice? This refers to unsafe or unnecessary procedures, wrong medications administered to the patients, or medications given in a wrongful dosage. Then we have something called as the unsafe healthcare communication. So what is this communication here? As we have 24 hours in a day, you cannot always expect a single doctor and a nurse to take care of the patient. So what we have is something called as the shift culture. So there is a doctor who can work for about 9 hours or even 12 hours. After that, you will have another doctor or the nurse who steps in that particular job role as well. So as they move from one shift to another shift, they also give all the updates about the patient to this particular nurse or the doctor. So during this particular period, there can be miscommunication as well. So one nurse might have told the other nurse to give a certain dosage, but the other nurse might give something else as well. that is what is called as the unsafe healthcare communication. So what we have is miscommunication between a doctor and a nurse, nurse and a nurse, or it can also be between a doctor and a doctor as well. These issues are persisting. That is because they have been working for 24 hours, more than 12 hours, which we all don't do, and that is the major reason of miscommunication. Then there are other issues like limited resources as well, poor access to the supply, for example oxygen required for the hospitals, or inadequate staffing levels, or it can be poor infrastructure, that which can also threaten the patient safety as well. One such example that we can take is oxygen supply that was stopped in the state of Uttar Pradesh, and as a result couple of children died during this process. So one is the limited resources. Nurses who also take care of the patient are sometimes less educated as well, and because of lack of exposure, lack of clinical experience, and in the absence of systematic method of selection and training, this can also be a threat to the patient safety as well. Finally, patient education is also important. Let's say for example there is the doctor who has given a particular prescription, asked the patient to take certain dosage of a medicine, but in case the patient is unaware, in case the patient is uneducated, or the patient does not know what dosage has to be taken, that will also impact the patient. And now during the COVID-19 crisis, there could be issues with respect to patient safety, says the author of this article. Why? Because there have been issues with respect to poor infrastructure in the health sector, staffing levels are very low, and there are poor supplies when it comes to the PPE kit as well. And at the same time, because we also have very limited number of doctors and also healthcare personnel, there could be a possibility of miscommunication as well. All this could exacerbate the issue of safety of the patient, says the author of this article. So what we have to make sure is that this understaffing, that is the major problem, will have to be relooked into, and healthcare workers who are putting in long number of hours, their difficulties will have to be understood, and they will have to be given minimal work or prescribed work, says the author of this article. And finally, what we have is the patients taking care of themselves, taking up all the precautionary measures, and even questioning the management of the hospitals to resist unnecessary medications and procedures is what we have to understand with reference to this article. Now let's look into the next article. This article here is speaking about India and China issue. This is across the line of actual control, but we will not be focusing on this part of the issue. Our only focus today would be on the Tibet. Why? Because the rest of the analysis have been completed in our earlier CNAs. What is the focus of today's article? It is about importance of Tibet to China and to other countries in and around China as well. When it comes to Tibetan autonomous region, what we have, it is very important and strategically important for China. Why? That is because of its mineral and natural resources. So kindly remember, because they have mineral and natural resources, they have been exploited by the mainland China. Then we have the Tibetan Plateau, which happens to be the largest water tank in the world. Why? Because major rivers of Asia, including Indus, Sutlej, Brahmaputra, Irrawaddy, Salween, Mekong, originate in the Tibetan Plateau. So because they originate in the Tibetan Plateau, it is not only important for China, it also flows to other countries as well. So other countries also hold Tibetan Plateau important to them. What we also have is China developing number of hydropower projects in different rivers of Tibet. So what this means is that because they are developing hydropower projects, they want to bridge the gap between the west as well as the east part of China. So what is happening here? Because they want to bridge this gap, they generate the electricity and they also provide generation of this electricity to their western part, and in case there is any excess of this electricity, the same will also be supplied to Nepal as well. So what will happen here? Nepal will have a cordial relationship with China as well. That is another important aspect when it comes to the international relations. Then there are already reports when it comes to the quantity of water. So because they are using it for the hydropower, because they have been constructing dams in this particular region, the quantity of water that is going to other countries are also impacted as well. Then there are other reports about quality of the water as well. Why? Because when we have the hydropower project, we will also have other industries that are set up as well. This can be most polluting as well. It can be nuclear construction activities can be started off in this region. So the quality of water that is reaching the lower riparian stage will also be under stress, says the author of this article. And as we all know, China is not transparent, and India and many other countries have asked for hydrological data as well. But China, like ever before, does not believe in transparency and does not give hydrological data to the lower riparian countries. So what is the way forward? So India, with respect to the line of actual control as well as with respect to the water issues, will have to select some of the professionals, experts who are from Indian Army, Indian Navy, Indian Air Force, diplomats, intelligence services people, cyber technology people, cartographic services people, and these people will have to come up with short term, medium and long term goals with respect to China. We cannot have ad hoc process, but what we require is all these experts coming together, making plan only in focus to China, is what this article all about. With reference to the other issues of line of actual control, we have discussed in our past 1 month as well. Now let's look into the next article. This article here is speaking about three important meetings. One is the foreign ministers meeting of the South Asian Association for Regional Cooperation. Then it speaks about the conference on interaction and confidence building measures in Asia. The third is about the 75th UN anniversary. First, let us look into the conference on interaction and confidence building measures in Asia. What is this forum all about? This is an intergovernmental forum. So all the governments from Asia, they come together, they cooperate. Why? Because they want to make sure that there is peace and tranquility and stability in the region of Asia. Kindly remember, India has been part of this particular forum ever since it was initiated. The idea of convening this was first proposed by Kazakhstan President Nurul Sultan Nazarbayev in 1992 at the 47th session of the United Nations General Assembly. What is the crux of this article? The crux of this article is about the lies that are being peddled by Pakistan. Pakistan in all these international forums, whether it is SARC or with respect to SICA or with respect to United Nations, has been calling that Kashmir issue has to be solved. But India has always said that Kashmir is an integral part of India and will remain an integral part of India forever after and eternally as well. So what we have to understand is that Pakistan is peddling lies, and India has also been responding to the lies of Pakistan. In fact, India went on to say that Pakistan is a country which is globally recognized as the epicenter of terrorism, which by its own admission harbors and trains terrorists and hail them as martyrs as well. So what we have to understand is Pakistan has internationalized this whole issue of Kashmir, and India has hit back at Pakistan, telling that it is a country of terrorism. It is a country which spreads terrorism. It uses non-state actors in spreading terrorism, is what this article all about. With respect to all these three meetings, Pakistan has been speaking about Kashmir issue in all these multilateral forums, but India has objected to this idea of raking the bilateral issue in the multilateral forums. It is this that we have to understand with reference to this article. Now let's look into some of the preliminary practice questions. Consider the following statements about Halam community. There are various tribes native to the state of Tripura, Assam and Mizoram. The Halam have no written language. The answer to this is both. Why have we taken this practice question? Because of the reference given under this article. So kindly remember, they are scheduled tribes in the region of Tripura, Assam and Mizoram. Now let's look into the next practice question. With reference to Gnanapeeth Award, which of the following statements is or correct? It is an Indian literary award presented annually by Bharatiya Gnanapeeth. The award is bestowed only on the Indian writers writing in Indian languages included in the 8th schedule only. This award may be given posthumously. The answer to this is one only. Why? Because this is not only about Schedule 8 languages, but it also includes English as well. The award may not be given posthumously. Only when they are alive this award can be given. Why have we taken this practice question? Because of the reference given under this article. Why? Because there was an announcement that was made last year where Gnanapeeth was to be awarded to Akhitam Achyutan Nambudari, who happens to be from the state of Kerala, is what this article all about. Now let's look into the next practice question. Which of the following statements is or correct about Competition Commission of India? The Competition Commission has regulatory and quasi-judicial powers. Commission has suo motu power to inquire whether an anti-competitive agreement or abuse of dominant position happens. Dominance per se is not illegal. Which of the statements are correct? The answer to this is 1, 2 and 3. Why have we taken this practice question? Because of the reference given under this article. So kindly remember, they have both regulatory functions and quasi-judicial functions. They can take any case with respect to suo motu cognizance, but that will be within 1 year. And we also have dominance, which is not illegal, but only when it is misused, only when it is abused, that is when dominance becomes illegal. Some of the examples include predatory pricing, directly or indirectly imposing unfair or discriminatory conditions, limits or restricts production of goods or provision of services, denial of market access. Now let's look into the next practice question. The terms event horizon, singularity, string theory and standard model are sometimes seen in the news in the context of, it is in the context of observation and understanding of the universe. It is not study of solar and lunar eclipse, it is not placing satellites in the orbit of the sun, or it is not the origin and evolution of living organisms on the earth. Now let's look into the mains practice question. Discuss the key features and associated concerns with the farm bills. Next question. Write a critical note on United National Liberation Front of West of Southeast Asia and its threat to India's internal security. So please write all your answers on the comment section. Peer review, come up with constructive criticism as well. This is it for today. Thank you for watching. All the best.